All right. Our facilitator for Veg Club tonight is Carol Appenzeller. She's also a co-lead of the food resiliency team at Bainbridge Prepares. Carol thinks about growing food more than anybody probably should. That's to our benefit. She's been growing great vegetables for decades and has been producing a ton of veg and grows all year long on her shy quarter acre here on the island, which is an inspiration for every vegetable grower west of the Cascades. Please take it away, Carol.
Thanks very much, and thanks for making all that work, John. Uh, all the behind the scenes stuff work. So I'm glad that everybody's here tonight. We're going to talk ecosystem in your soil. And first, though, I want to say thank you to everybody who did that compost tour. I thought your questions were so amazing and based in knowledge and concern for different elements like the content of the compost and testing and also how to close the loop and support each other in community, which was really cool. So that was so fun, and you made it happen. So that's really great. We have other things going on before in May coming up. So one of those has to do with food banks. I don't know if everybody knows this, but there is a farm on Bainbridge that farms only for food bank food. It's called Peaceful Morning. It's right in the middle. It's really easy to get to. And there's a pea patch that does it, which Rock Farm Pea Patch produces a lot for food banks, and individual growers like you and me also do produce for food banks. But we're going to take a look at Peaceful Morning in a field trip on May 17th. So watch out for that. Get on the email list for this class, this series. You can just email me directly and tell me that you want to be on it. And the link for my email is, of course, in the chat. The reason we're doing this, we're going to have more experiences with this kind of growing is because there's a convergence of changes happening that may reduce food, supplemental food assistance, because that's funded by federal funds in many cases. And there are multiple ways that people get supplemental food assistance. So there's supplement for mothers with little children, there's SNAP, there's some for people who are for seniors who don't have enough. And so if that changes and they're stressed and food prices, if they do go up, the food banks are going to see more people. But where does the food bank get its food? Besides us, it gets some food from federal programs. So those may collide. The fact that that might be a stressor is very much on the mind of the food banks right now. So we always encourage people to work at places like Peace Morning, do some beautiful, soothing volunteer work that feels really great, but it has never meant more than right at this moment. So we're going to take this field trip and encourage you to work that morning as well, pitch in a little bit. So we'll have limited enrollment, but we'll be glad to see you there. And another thing we're doing in May is a Zoom about how to get heat lovers to bear better and grow more food in the same space, how to run tight successions if you don't know what those are, or how to get like maybe 2 to 4 times the amount of food out of your space. And it's delightful because you have this more variety, greater variety of crops. And also how to thwart critters without a fence. So those are some events that are happening coming up. And I wanted to hit them at the beginning, and I'll put these back up at the end to remind everybody who wasn't here yet. So tonight we're going to talk about organic soil systems versus synthetic, and whether or not soil is inert. Of course it's not. And we're going to meet the ecosystem that runs your garden generally. Not everybody, because there are too many species in there. And then we're going to make sense of why we do what we do based on that ecosystem. And at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about soil tests. I'm just going to encourage you and tell you how to get some interpretation for those soil tests if you decide to do them. Not everybody does. So here is a myth. Plants make their own food. They make their own sugar. That's all they make to start with. So photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide and water, rips it apart, and rearranges them. That's glucose right there. And then the plant can do a couple of things with that. It can rip it apart and rearrange it again. It can make something like vitamin C, surprisingly. Some vitamins are not very complicated. Or it could stack those up and make starch, like in a potato. So that is what they can come up with from what they make themselves. But that's not all they need. Chlorophyll itself, the green stuff that does this process, cannot be made exclusively with the product right here. It needs magnesium and nitrogen. So there's chlorophyll right there. So the plant itself can't function, and neither can our bodies function without things like nitrogen and magnesium. And where do they come from? They come from your soil. This over here is an amino acid that builds proteins. Plants need them, we need them, and our bodies aren't just built of protein, they're run by protein. Many hormones are proteins. So see all the nitrogens in there? That is not coming from what plants have made, it is coming from the soil. And later we'll learn that it doesn't actually come from the soil, it comes from the organisms in the soil. There's vitamin B and all of these minerals. So I'm going to show you this complex looking thing, which you'd have to scooch in to read it. If you want a copy of it, I'd be able to find you one. But the point of this is just that all of those elements that are in the soil support the function of the plant. Like fruit will be malformed if they're missing certain elements. Crispness, the ability to fight insects. And of course, those same elements are in our bodies. So we need to get those. And we might think we're getting them from eating chicken, but the chicken got them from a plant and the plant got them from the soil. So who's doing all of this? It's bacteria and fungi and nematodes and microarthropods and all kinds of little creatures. And a teaspoon of soil can contain more organisms in it than there are people on the earth. A teaspoon of soil has more microorganisms than probiotic yogurt that has been specially cultured to have the maximum number of bacteria. And it's many, many species and meters of fungal mycelia, but they're all so thin and tiny that they all fit in there. So this, we're not going to memorize this. I'm not explaining anything on here, but each box is a different element, and they're all cycling above ground into plants and in the atmosphere, back and down. But look how much of this happens underneath the soil. Every arrow and a box is a different microorganism creating this. So who runs this is the critters under the ground. So when we look at these things tonight, I think you're going to hear things that you already do, but it will tell you why you're doing them. And maybe if we skip them sometimes, we're not going to skip them as much because then we'll understand more. The more you know, the more it makes sense. So this used to be wild animals in place of the cattle, but this is how nutrients went around for the whole history of the world. And we did not call it organic model agriculture. We just called it how things worked because we didn't have synthetic agriculture. We didn't have synthetic products. But then we invented this in the 1800s. This guy's not in the 1800s. We invented a process to get nitrogen out of the air artificially. So you could just grab it straight from the air and concentrate it. And then you could get concentrated nitrates. And we did not use them for a long time because it was expensive and our farms were set up so there were animals nearby, so we didn't need it. So it's either a mixed farm or a dairy farm next to a wheat farm, that kind of thing. So those animal products were available. But in World War II, we needed a lot of nitrogen, not for agriculture, although it was used for agriculture, but also because the N in TNT is nitro. So we needed it for explosives. And there was a huge federal influx of cash to build 5 um, Haber process units, which are these things, all over the Midwest, away from the coasts and right conveniently where a lot of farming ended up being. And so we started to train farmers to use synthetics. And when we're using synthetics, especially back then, we weren't using much compost at all, and we weren't using organic sources that have things like carbs in them. So look what happened. We lost a lot of nutrients. And this was when we were not building our soil because we didn't quite have the means to build it and use those synthetics at the same time. And you might think it's just one study, but actually it's several studies. And this is, there are 2 links to this data in the resource page. I'm going to refer to the resource page a lot. If you're new, that's in the chat. If you don't see it, it'll show up in the chat again. That's my favorite quote from these, because I can't imagine eating, what is it, 9 oranges? Okay, so now that the USDA as official position says soil is not just an inert substance into which we put some fertilizers, but it is a vital living ecosystem. So we need some vocabulary first. So there are a couple ways to define what's a fertilizer versus an amendment, but I'm going to use the one where it's concentrated, and we know how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are in it. And so examples of that are fish emulsion and blood meal and cottonseed meal. Amendments are often less concentrated. We don't always know how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is in that, say, compost that we bought. And they have more carbohydrates. So we're not used to thinking of soil as having carbs, but compost has carbs. We call it carbon when we're making compost, but it's literally carbohydrates. They're just not carbohydrates that we can digest. So we call them fiber, and we used to think that they scrubbed out our intestines, right? But now we're finding that fiber is actually feeding our intestinal bacteria. So when we have a compost pile breakdown and it gets hot, it's because some of what we put in there was carbon, it was carbohydrates for the microorganisms, and they make body heat. That is body heat of the microorganisms when your compost pile gets hot. So let's compare an organic system with a synthetic system. On the left, we're using organic fertilizers and amendments, and they go into the soil and they are not generally usable. Many of them are not usable by plants. They have to be eaten by microorganisms, and then those organisms die and excrete, and the plants can take up the stuff. That is a lot like our gut bacteria. We know now that our gut bacteria are eating the things we eat and then changing them to other things that are good for us that we can then absorb. On the synthetic side, over on the right, that is water soluble, and it just goes straight into solution in the soil, and it can be immediately picked up by the plants, which is why you can get fertilizer burn with a synthetic. They want you to water before and after so that you kind of dilute it so it doesn't rush into the plant too quickly. The left side, the organic fertilizer side, is like me saying I need carbs and vitamin C for my day, so I'm going to eat an orange. The right side is like me saying I need carbs and vitamin C for my day, so I'm going to get some sugar and some vitamin C and stir it into water, dissolve it, and eat it. Or drink it. I have access to it, but it's quite a different process. So it's very analogous. The left side is very analogous to our gut bacteria. So we say that the food web is a digestive system for the plants. So how do we have healthy soil? How do we build this up? I'm going to affirm what you do and maybe change a couple of things that you do. First, you might want to know what your inorganic parts of the soil do a little bit, or at least know what they are. They're the parts that were never alive or haven't been alive for millions of years. So sand is super gritty. It drains really well. We love it for that. It drains too well if you have too much of it, so we hate it for that. And then clay on the other side holds nutrients like crazy. We like to say, oh, I hate the clay in my garden, but it holds nutrients. So having some clay is really great. And having some clay in your soil holds moisture too. And silt's kind of in the middle. So we love a mix of these things, sand, silt, and a little clay, and some composty organic matter, like maybe 5%. And we get something called loam. So I want to point out that this person is proud enough to be showing you this chunk and has not broken it into powder. This farmer has not crumbled it to something that looks like coffee grounds in his hand. And that's because it's supposed to be a chunk. Soil has a wicking process, and those chunks help the moisture come from below the ground up. It also supports bacteria. It supports these networks. I'll show you these. And what we like about this chunky soil is that it's not just big chunks, but even this part that doesn't look like it's made of chunks is made of little chunks with spaces in between. So let's look at what that looks like. These are aggregates. So we're close up on that. And they are sticky chunks of soil. And they have spaces in between. So the spaces let excess water drain out, but the little tiny holes inside the aggregates hold moisture. So you get this. Have you ever seen a plant tag that says this plant prefers, what is it? Well drained but moisture retentive soil. Like, what is that? Well, this is that. It does both. And see all those orange dots? Those are bacteria. They're producing lots of stuff. One of the things that they're producing is a biogum, which makes the chunks stick together better. And they also can interact with your plants to provide nutrients and even coat the roots. And I'll tell you about that in a little while. And those white strings are mycelial hyphae, and I'll show you what they do. But they're very important. They're holding the soil together. We don't want to tear these up too much, which is why some people do no-till and some people do low-till. And we don't mean like with a rototiller. Some people do gentle turning, but I would say that pulverizing soil and smashing it to pieces the way that my neighbor used to do. He was, he was an old school guy, and he would just go over it with the rototiller until it was absolute powder. So that is not, it's not great for our soil. So what we want is soil with tilth. So it has all of the qualities on the left. I'm sure you can read them. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about soil having good tilth. And by diggable, we don't mean light as, coffee grounds, as I say. It's just, it won't break your fork. Oops. So we can learn some things about the organism driving our soil as well. And so you can see all these different kinds of organisms. I'm not going to teach you like the difference between a mite and a springtail. Maybe you can tell us the difference in a mite and a springtail. But I will say this, actinomycetes, microorganisms here, that is what produces that nice soil smell. That's what you're breathing when we smell it. So one of the things that's in there is mycorrhizal fungi. And Ben and Robin, do you try to support mycorrhizal fungi for your fruit trees? Fruit trees prefer a fungal dominated soil, right? How do you do that?
Sorry, we were, yeah. Uh, yeah, I've got some mycorrhizal fungi powder that if I'm planting a new fruit tree, I'll sprinkle on the roots of the fruit tree after I've wet it before we plant it. So that helps quite a bit. And then also we've just mulch them every year with whatever compost we've got left over. We just spread around a ring around some of the fruit trees and just let the worms and everybody work it back in.
That's cool. So do you ever use ramial chip, like arborist chip, that's wood chips with like lots of green leafy stuff in it?
Sometimes if we have it available, but we try to compost that stuff or use that stuff around flowers first.
Okay.
But it all breaks down eventually. Around here with all the rain and moisture, all the chips tend to break down pretty fast. So works
Yeah,
out.
yeah. I know somebody with a, oh, sorry.
If you're ever planting a orchard in a place that used to have an orchard where the roots have rotted away, there's a thing called apple replant disease. This fungi that you're talking about here is very important to establish the good stuff on the roots and kind of hold the apple replant disease at bay. It's very important.
Wow, yeah. Because they actually produce like antimicrobial products, chemicals that will compete, right?
Yes.
That's amazing. What other things do we know, crowd? Anybody else want to say anything?
There's a question about night soils for what's your take on night soils? Ick, but question mark.
Oh,
I'm assuming
you
it's
know what?
fertilizer.
It's human.
That was
It's
me.
human waste. Oh, Laura, I don't know, but are you reading about that at all?
No, but as you talked about how it's the excrement of other organisms,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that in the past that was a thing. I
For sure.
don't participate in that, but I'm curious if what's in 2025, what's going on with that?
Yeah, does anybody do that? It's called humanure, by the way.
I
If you're
feel
going to Google it and learn all about it and teach us next year, Laura, thank you for volunteering to do that.
Yeah.
You're on the hook. You have 1 year to figure it out. Does anybody do it? No one's going to confess that they do it.
Mm-mm.
You can compost. I mean, you're not necessarily digging it in at the base of your strawberry plant, right? You compost it and then you use it.
Who are you asking?
But I don't know.
No one's confessing.
I don't know. Whoever. No. Well, okay. So now we know Laura's going to present next year on her project.
But I still do have a wood chip question because I know that wood chips tie up the nitrogen. I also know that wood chips
dug in.
They're a brand. Say it again. Is that when they're dug in?
If they're dug into the soil, they'll tie up the nitrogen. But if they're on top, they don't tie up the nitrogen in the soil.
Okay. And so what about composting? Like if they're the brown in the compost, that's good.
They don't break down fast enough. And they don't break down very fast. So you're probably going to not get, they won't have broken down for a really long time. So they tend to get sifted out because you just get this really big, if you have big wood chips. Tell me if you disagree with this, Robin, or anyone else. Even if people use like sawdust, it's so high carbon that it just requires a whisper of it, and you can't put a lot of it in. Does that make sense? Robin, do you ever put wood products in yours? Ben, I'm assuming Robin's the composter because she mentioned it once.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm actually the composter.
He does the
Oh, you
labor.
are? Okay.
Those big compost heaps are, but we use wood chips in our chicken coop as the bedding in our chicken coop, along with straw. We do straw sweep too.
Or shavings?
It's shavings. It's shavings. So it's pretty thin.
Okay.
But then it gets up with the chicken manure that ends up going into the compost pile. And the chicken manure combined with the wood chips breaks it down pretty well. With the green matter that comes from the garden combined there, it actually heats up nicely. So the shavings do pretty well, but I've never tried thick chips or, arborist chip kind of thickness in the compost heap. I think that might be too much for it.
Well, the ratio with chickens too is chicken manure is so high nitrogen that you are balancing that out. And then you think, oh, I'm using the shavings as my carbon and then adding kitchen waste, which is nitrogen stuff. So you're like, nitrogen from the chickens is probably triple power and then more nitrogen from the house. So you're not getting overwhelmed by that. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So
it works
Laura,
out well.
Sorry. It works out well for you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. That's good information.
So one of the things that's happening here is, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but these are fungal mycelia. Most of this isn't roots. The plant actually photosynthesizes and then drips a little sugar out of its roots. And any fungus that is like a spore, that's the seed, is nearby, gets fed extra. So it gets to grow extra, which is why they're now growing those things, those white things are fungal hyphae going out into the soil. They pick stuff up from the soil and they can bring it back and share it with the tree. It just happens by diffusion. They're not thinking about it, but they're producing protective chemicals and all kinds of things. Usually when we're focusing on a fungally dominated soil, that's something that trees like. So that's why we use things like people will chip mulch over the top of their tree roots every year, excuse me, with really fresh little branch chips, not like the wood from the middle of a tree. It's called ramial chip, which means branching, I think. And it's got a lot of leaf green stuff, and it has lots of juicy baby bark from those chips. And trees tend to really like that. If you're interested in that, right now, write down my email and I'll send you, actually, you can Google it. Her name is Linda Chalker Scott, or you can email me. John is about to probably put her page. She has basically a PhD in wood mulch, and anything that people say about wood mulch, she'll go, wrong. Here's how it really works. So she's an interesting person to read about. And yeah, she's cool. Okay, moving on. We got bacteria in our soil as well. They digest, of course, they're the digestive system. They can produce antibiotics, like John McInnes was just talking about fungus doing that. So they can fight diseases that would attack roots. They sometimes produce growth hormones, and they produce that biogum, and plants that have that biogum on their roots conserve water, because like biogum's like really hygroscopic. It really attracts moisture. And also a certain kind of bacteria is virtually the only way nitrogen gets in your food. So if you have protein in your body, if you own muscles and skin, and bone is made of a lot of protein, and you're run by proteins, you can thank plants for it, because protein is made with a lot of nitrogen. And you are surrounded by about 3/4 of the room that you're in is nitrogen. And you've breathed it your whole life. Do you know how much of that nitrogen has gotten in and made your body? None, because you can't take it in that way. And plants can't breathe it in. It has to go through the soil. It has to go through bacteria, so that nitrogen in the air gets into the soil, and it hits certain kinds of nitrogen fixing bacteria. They take it in and they stick it in together with other atoms that then allow the plants to take them up. These bacteria, some of them live in the soil, but a lot of them live in the roots of what are called legumes. So they're peas and beans. Locust trees, I think, are legumes. There are a couple of trees. Clover and alfalfa are legumes. And that picture in the upper right-hand corner are the nodules. They're bacteria hotels. So these plants, the legumes, harbor and invite these bacteria in, and then peas and beans and clover and vetch use that nitrogen to make very high protein plants. And that's why we give them to cattle, because they're very good for them. So we can keep this in the soil by, if we'll talk cover crops in the fall, but some people will plant an intentional cover crop of legumes, and then they cut them off right when they start to flower in the spring, and they turn them under gently, and then they rot in, and they've actually put nitrogen into the soil. So you might think, well, nitrogen doesn't just come from these legumes because I put nitrogen fertilizer on. But the nitrogen fertilizer originally came from either animals, like manure, or plants, like, not kelp meal, but alfalfa meal. And somewhere along the line, that all came from the air, even if it was, millennia ago. Does anybody have anything to say about nitrogen fixing bacteria?
Yeah, I
Okay,
do.
be that way.
Oh, when you have your legumes, you can, and they're done for the season, you can cut the dead plants off and then just leave the roots in the soil because that's where the good stuff is.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I actually said that in my head and I didn't say it out loud. Yeah. So we would want to cut that off because not only because the nitrogen's down there, but because then those bacteria can persist in your soil, right, Dee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, I've got
Nothing
a question.
awkward. Oh yeah.
Oh,
Hi,
sorry.
Tammy.
Hi. Was I interrupting? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying nothing awkward about Zoom meetings.
All right. So
you have to turn yourself on. Yes.
this fall was the first fall that I planted fava bean as a cover crop in an area. And at some point they were doing great. They were like, 8 inches tall. And then they just died. Like maybe it was a frost or something. They just died. And which really surprised me. Do you think there's still that nitrogen fix, that the bacteria nodules underneath there? Or was it like, what do you think happened?
I mean, when they were fine, they probably had some rhizobial bacteria. And this is your garden. You've grown a lot of stuff in there, so it probably has rhizobium in it. You can get an inoculant for them if you want to do that, but it's specific to fava, I think. You know those general inoculants that they sell? Sometimes it's just for peas and beans.
Oh,
but
talk
yeah, I
later.
mean, if they're growing and there were bacteria under there, that nitrogen is potentially still in there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Does anybody want to contradict that or tell us what's up? No? Okay. Okay, let's get going. Okay, so what do? We can also do no harm. So you know the drill. Cut out your herbicides and your pesticides, stuff that kills living organisms. So sometimes we do use it. We have to use it for some reason, but it's not going to help, right? And rototilling the heck out of it, of course. Some steer manures are salty. I think we're getting better at this because we're not using, they rinse them first now, but if you have a problem or if you have use a lot of manure, then I'd be interested to know if you think there's any salty buildup. John McInnes, you said you use a lot of steer manure, but it's not a problem, right? John maybe stepped away.
Sorry. No. Sorry, I couldn't get to the mute button there. I don't use steer
Okay.
manure. I use alpaca manure.
Oh, wow. Fancy.
And that can go
Cool.
can go straight on. It's not a hot manure. It can go straight onto the garden.
Wow.
I typically compost it, but it can, and I've done it in a pinch. It can go straight to the garden.
Interesting.
The other nice thing about alpaca manure is their digestive system is much more intense, if that's the right word, than cows or horses. Horse manure, and I had a bunch of horse manure spread on my farm up in Squim, but I made sure I knew exactly where the feed was coming from. Horses don't digest their food very well, and there's a lot of seed pass through. Alpaca, there is almost no, if any, seed pass through. I've never seen any weeds or anything that I didn't recognize coming up out of where I put alpaca manure on it. They have a very, very, very thorough digestive system.
Interesting. Cool. Thanks. You can also prevent soil compaction because we want those spaces. We don't want too many spaces, but we want some spaces in there. So we're going to walk between, not inside of our beds. So sometimes people will make like an 8 by 10 bed and then they have to walk around in it. We don't want to do that. That's why we like a 3 to 4 foot wide bed. And then you walk beside it. And we can add compost, of course. And I say if you dig, I turn my soil, I crack my soil with a fork and things like that. I just am respectful of the fact that some people don't want to dig at all. And that's not really what this session, this series is about, because that's a more specialized way to do stuff. So most people I know do turn a little bit. If you do dig, do that test that I talked about before. You grab a handful of soil and you squeeze it. And if water comes out, it's too wet. And then you open your hand and you poke it. And if it goes squish, then it's too wet. If you poke it and it breaks into 3 pieces, 2 or 3 pieces, it just cracks apart. That's a good texture for digging. If you open your hand and the thing just goes to powder, then it's too dry. So it's nice to do it when it's moist, but not soaking wet. If it's soaking wet, it smushes everything together. It's a great way to make bricks. And we can also turn very gently with a fork. So this guy has already, in previous years, he's built his soil. So he doesn't feel like he has to necessarily turn the soil a whole lot. So he's put the fork all the way in and he's just pulling back on it, and the tines come up and it sort of cracks the soil, and it lets any fertilizer or compost that he put on the top before he started digging, it lets it fall in. Maybe he jiggles it a little bit, but he's not, smashing it and turning it over and smashing it to a powder. So have I said that enough? I think I'll stop talking about that. So I wonder how you till. Does anybody, is anybody no-till? You don't till at all, you just pile stuff on top? You got no-till people? Okay.
We don't till that much.
Yeah. Do you never turn anything, or do you just like turn it a little bit, or what?
If there's a lot of clay in the soil, yeah, we'll just do a light turning and then we build everything up on top of that. And add organic material for the next 10 years and hopefully get a crop or two that works.
So we don't till either. We've got sort of modified raised beds everywhere, or open ground that we mulch heavily. But I mean, we don't do traditional. I mean, people who are no-till have got a method, like you said, that's intense.
Yeah.
But we don't till it. We just dig in it where we need to put a plant and then close it back up again. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think of that as almost no-till. Yeah. And I'm now imagining that some new gardener here has like a 2-year-old garden that they started, and it's basically in subsoil, which is not really soil. And they're thinking, oh, I'm not allowed to dig that. I think that when you're establishing a garden, especially if it's in really lean, poor soil with no organic matter in it, I would dig like here, probably as deep as you can, because I can't go down more than maybe 10 inches before I hit glacial cobbles. So I don't mind starting a garden by turning compost into it. So you don't have to multi-dig this. You put your AP garden fertilizer, if you're starting, on it. And then I would do like 3 inches of compost, just if you're starting on really poor soil. And I would dig it in 10 inches if you can get that deep. And I'm saying that because I want a new gardener to be able to grow in that soil. And then as you develop, your soil is going to get, year after year, you're going to continue to do an inch of compost or something, and your soil is going to develop more. And by develop, I mean it's going to have more tilth. It looks good. It's got the right gaps in it. And then you can back off on your, turning things in. So anyway, I'm trying to say I'm flexible. We're going to feed that ecosystem organic material. It doesn't really have to be that much. Some people go as low as 1/2 inch a year once they have really good, a really good organic material in their soil. A lot of people do like 1 inch a year. Initially, again, if you're working on the subsoil, a lot of people do more than that for a couple of years. But it sort of solves both problems. It doesn't solve them, but it ameliorates them. If clay is too sticky and doesn't drain well, it'll help it kind of drain better, and it helps sand hold water. So it also holds nutrients, because some nutrients don't want to stick to the mineral parts of the soil. Specifically, nitrogen doesn't want to stick to the sand and the clay because it's negatively charged, and the particles in the soil are negatively charged. If you really want to know, I can explain that. But compost has receptors to hold on to those nutrients. And of course, it's going to support those microbes. They're eating that compost. So how are we going to feed it? We have Dee's idea of leaving roots when you take a plant out. So you're going to take a plant out and you're thinking, I'm going to clear that bed. You do have the option of taking a knife with you and you cut it off just under the soil. If you cut it above the soil, lots of times if you cut a lettuce like that, it'll just keep growing back, right? And you want to put peas in there and it's just in the way. But if you cut it off under the soil, then very often the roots will rot out. If you can do that, 3 weeks before you plant, more power to you, then it will have rotted a little bit, but either way, it's fine. You can put that compost on. That looks redundant to my other things. And mulch, we've been talking about mulch. So the lower right is ramial chip, ramial meaning little branches. So you can see there are leaves in it, and it's from small branches. So there's a lot of juicy sugar in there. The little branches are pretty sugary. So I am not the world's best fruit grower of fruit trees. I mean, I just don't have that much experience, but I am in favor of ramial chip if you can get it. And if it's deciduous, all the better, but it's really hard to find a deciduous broadleaf chip around here. Anyway, I'm really not the expert on fruit trees. So back to the vegetables. In the upper left corner, those are leaves, and they're everywhere around here, and they're free, and they have a lot of minerals in them. So on vegetable plants, on vegetable beds, we typically don't use big chip like on the lower right, because if that gets turned in, we start building up more and more and more chip. Permaculturists do that, but they pull the mulch back and they plant in it, and then they put the mulch back, and they're sort of careful because they're not digging, right? So they're not digging those chips in. But anyway, leaves are a great solution. Our big leaf maple leaves, when they get wet, they'll laminate like this, which isn't great. So the solution is grab them on a dry day when they're like curly and dry, and put them on your beds, or run over them with the lawnmower to chip them down. But small leaves abound around here as well. So you might think, well, that's because I don't want my plants to dry out. But it's not just that. It's really that when the soil goes wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, it hurts the soil microbes. And the soil at the same time, if it's in the summer, is going hot, cold, also not great for the soil microbes. So when you're mulching and when we're turning our garden and like being careful with the soil, we can be aware of why we're doing it now. I don't say it has to be a spiritual practice, but I'm just saying, like, there's a scientific reason that we're doing it. And you are doing good for your garden by doing these things. We can also try to keep nitrogen in. Nitrogen escapes. So why does it escape? Because in one of its forms, nitrogen is a gas, and in another of its forms, it's water soluble. So if you put, I read an ag report that said, if you put fresh manure and spread it out on the ground and leave it there for, I think, 12 hours, you can leave half the nitrogen to the air. And then if our rains come, they rinse nitrogen down and out and into creeks and streams, and that's bad news for them. And also, we don't have any nitrogen left. So nitrogen is squirrely, so we're going to keep it with all of these. Of course, put organic matter in and keep your tilling gentle. We put nitrogen in the springtime rather than the fall. In the UK, they'll say manure your garden in the winter so it can break down. But here, when we manure the garden, it just rains out if we put it down in the fall. So we time our nitrogen for the springtime. And also for leaf growth instead of fruit ripening. So I'm interested, tomato growers. What I do, and some farmers I know do, is before they transplant the tomato, they amend the bed, and so it has lots of nitrogen so it can grow into a big plant. But once the tomato's set, nobody's applying more nitrogen. Maybe you do. Tammy, do you apply nitrogen all the way to the end of the life of the plant, or do you?
No, I don't.
Okay. I thought you were saying, oh, I put.
Yeah, I don't want that to go into the leaves. I want produce at that point.
Yeah. And the plant itself, in addition to not wanting to grow more leaves, which is what nitrogen does, is we want the plant to know and realize its mortality. So it puts energy into fruiting. And also, by the end of the year, the plan for a plant is that it should have given most of its nutrients in its body into the fruit. So we don't want a lot of nitrogen around, partly because it's going to pollute streams, waste your money. It's unnecessary. And also, if you promote so much leaf growth, as you say, Tammy, it's not ever going to occur to the plant that it should make babies. It's like, I'm just going to grow leaves forever because I'm immortal. Yeah, I want to say one thing about mulch. I don't mulch things like basil and lettuce when they're tiny, especially lettuce, because it's during a wet time of the year that I put my first lettuces out. And if I mulch right around them, then the slugs can just live under the mulch and eat the lettuce. So I wait until the soil around the lettuce, as it grows, starts to be at risk of drying out because it's getting warmer and drier. And then I mulch it, and then it's less of a slug threat that way. If you apply lime, and I'm not really talking much about lime because, well, for reasons that I'll tell you in a little while, but if you do it, fun fact, you shouldn't put it on at the same time as your nitrogen because it'll bind up the nitrogen, and it does a bunch of other weird stuff with nitrogen as well. It can react with it. So a lot of times people think, oh, I'll just fertilize and put lime on at the same time. But it's good to do it in the fall, or at least 3 weeks, maybe a month before you put nitrogen on, if you're a limer. Lastly, this is for you, Robin. I've taken this off and I'm putting it back on because you've enlightened me that people want to hear about it. You can get a soils test. Has anybody had a soil test? I have. You have, Tammy? Was it helpful?
No, I couldn't read it.
Oh, I've got a solution for you if you ever want to go back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? I have. Robin saying yes.
I have, but the answers were not actionable.
Oh, why not?
The soil was good enough for what I was trying to grow. It was mainly a landscape question, and they were trying to give me answers for vegetable growing.
Oh, interesting. Did it answer your landscape question, or they were just saying it's not enough for veg?
They were just saying that you needed to add all this stuff and I'm like, no, it's a landscape. I'm not adding all of the nitrogen and things that they were recommending.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. It's quite different to grow veg because you're asking them to produce all this green stuff every year, right? And then you pull them out. So you're basically mining the soil as you take the plant out.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was using A&L Laboratories, which is back east, I think. Or maybe this is the one in Oregon. I forget which.
They're here.
But they do a really good report.
That's great.
Easy to
Glad
read.
to hear it. That's what I'm going to demo.
From a company in Colorado, outside of Denver, where you collect it all. It was like $35. You collect it all into little containers and then ship it back to them, and they give you a report. I haven't done it yet because I think it's pretty critical that you do it in the fall after you've gotten everything out, versus now I'm starting to put my compost back on, and I just don't think it's going to be an accurate read now.
Yeah.
But
you want a baseline, not based on what you just put in, but like in the fall when everything's eaten up, right? Taken up by the plants, right? And then you know what to add the following spring. So it's great to do it in the fall, but since it has to do with soil, we'll talk about it right now. So they're useful. They were developed for synthetic. A lot of the techniques were developed for synthetic growing, but they are developing ones that are better for organics. And they can detect if you have too much of an element or too little. And it's important for people who've grown, like if this is your first year, don't bother unless you really are the soil test kind of engineer type. But if you're just thinking, I just want to do a little garden, you can just put compost and fertilizer in there and grow a garden. But after a while, when we've been putting on, say, balanced AP fertilizer on over and over again, you can actually get too much of one thing and it can compete. Like some elements will compete with calcium in your soil. And so you'll think you have a calcium deficiency, but it's that you have too much phosphorus. So that happens sometimes. So you might consider a soil test. And they will give you direct recommendations. One thing about soil tests is they tell you how to get your sample, and sometimes they're talking about to farmers, and they say use your blah 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 soil probe, and you're like, I don't have that. So I did create a link in the resource page to show you how to sample for a home garden. Except when you do, you need more soil than they say. I think that's the thing. They just get a couple of cups, but you need read how much when you get your test, but you need like 2 pounds of soil and you're going to mail it. So let me just walk you through this. Just that's a lot of scary stuff, isn't it? So this is A&L like you did, Grace. The prices are much higher than this. I couldn't get a current price list, but the tests are similar. There's the very basic one. It's for phosphorus, calcium, magnesium. So all those letters are mostly just elements that they're going to tell you about, and then you can add them, but I'll show you about how to add them too. So that's the basic one that the conservation district recommends. So these are codes for which, what you can get for your soil test, but they just say get the S1BN. Some people want to know about their nitrogen as well. This has nitrogen in the form of nitrates, but that's too much jargon. So this looks scary, right? This is what you have to fill out. So it has stuff like previous crop. Well, if it used to be your lawn, just write lawn or veg or something, shrubs. Don't worry about it too much. Sample depth, you probably want to get right. You're supposed to take the organic matter off the top, like if you have chips or mulch or something, and then dig down a certain distance and then scoop your soil. And you're not supposed to use an iron implement. So not a rusty trowel. So you want a stainless steel thing, right? And you might think, I have to go buy a stainless steel trowel. No, you don't. Do you have a really strong spoon in the kitchen? Like a really tough salad serving thing that's stainless steel? You can use that. So I don't think you need to get fancy. And you're going to scoop up your soil sample into a plastic bag in most cases. And the instructions come with when you get this sheet. And mail it off to them and see how it says pounds per acre and pounds per 1,000 square feet. Probably check that because you don't have an acre garden, do you? And then there's you can do a little bit of math to fix that. And if the word math scares you, oh, yeah, you need to look at that because that's scary, right? Like, what does that mean for what I have to put on there? But they'll give you data back. It might look like this, or it might be a graph. But here's what you need. Oops. They'll tell you about your pH. Sorry, I'm a little ahead of myself. We like to keep pH between 6.5 and 7 because these fat colors mean that it's easy for the plants to absorb the nutrient. If you get too low or too high, it gets harder. And they'll tell you how to do that too. Okay, these are the guys you need. Write this number down if you're going to get a soil test. I call them every year and I say, I can't believe it's still true. Is it still true? And they say, yes, we will have you call us, email your soil test results to us, and we will walk you through it. And I said, will you tell them what to put on? And they said, yes, we'll give them options. And I said, what about the math where you have to divide one number by another number? And they said, we will tell them how to do the math. So I haven't had them walk me through, but I see you clapping, Tammy. Would that have solved your problem?
No.
What's that? I didn't hear.
No, I'm watching a video.
Oh, Joanne, I think you could mute because we're hearing your conversation. Anyway, these guys are great. They're just amazing, and they really, really know their stuff. It's as I understand, it's a nonprofit. Has anybody used these guys? The Garden Hotline? I feel like it's associated with Tilth, but they're just amazing. So if you're feeling like you'd like to get a soil test, you've been gardening for a while and you're wondering like what's in there, or you want to start a really big garden and you're really committed and you just want to start it right because you're about to spend thousands of dollars, you could get a soil test. And in autumn, it's a great time to do it. And then these guys will guide you through. Does anybody have any comments about soil and microorganisms? Have we done all the chat questions, John?
Hang on
Or
just a
comments?
second. I'm going back and looking
Thank
through comments about chip drop, bribing chip drop to
you can
get your
get chips from
chips.
Chip Drop.
Yeah. I haven't had a successful chip drop yet, but some people do. Laura says leave them a 6-pack. That's
Oh,
that's a good
so
one.
if you go to an arborist truck and you say, if you drop your chips off at my house, I will give you a 6-pack. Is that what you're saying, Laura?
I will not confirm nor deny, but sometimes they ask you for a picture of the drop location, and if there happens to be a 6-pack sitting there on the tarp, then that's what happens to be there.
Oh my goodness.
And then
That's
somebody
funny.
talked a little bit about permaculture sheet mulching. Beth had something about permaculture sheet mulching in there
Is
with
that you, Beth
amendments.
Bayless?
That's from Beth had it from Toby Hemingway's Gaia's Garden. Looked like a way to start
Beth, are you
a
listening right
bed.
now? Can you tell us what you mean? You want to tell us about sheet mulching?
There, I found the unmute. This is a project I did some years ago for the school district. They tore down a gymnasium at Odyssey and wanted to put in a school garden. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah, and the district, it was a gymnasium site, so it was very compacted gravel. And I used this sheet mulching method, and I was amazed at how well it worked. And the parent community brought in bags of leaves, and we had to get sterilized manure from shorts out in Chimicum or Squim or somewhere. But it was amazing how well it worked, and it kind of taught me that given, I'd say it was less than a year, and these bacteria, these great ingredients, nature really works.
Oh, that is great. So that's an option. That's an option for no-till and for doing a huge area, right? So you didn't have any plants. Usually when you do sheet mulching, you mow it as short as you can, right?
No, just gravel.
Oh, you did it right on gravel. That's amazing. They're doing it at Vireo Farm too, trying to just bring back some soil because it used to be a gravel pit, right?
It was a parking lot. Yeah.
Oh, parking lot.
Yeah. During harvest fair.
Yeah. So you can put layers of organic matter that would go into your compost, like manure and leaves, right? And then you just the sheet reference is that it's not in a pile; it's in this layer, right?
And it's pretty
the layers
prescribed. I could photograph. I have the book, and it's got an illustration. I could photograph it and post it somehow, maybe, if I was more clever than I am. But it's pretty the ratios.
Anybody who wanted it could ask me for it.
Yeah.
But if people look up sheet mulching and they go to, is it in a book?
Yes, it's in Gaia's Garden, A Guide to Home-Scale Permaculture by Toby Hemingway. And the ratios are fairly prescribed.
Well, that's where people can go then, if they want to go with that.
Yep.
That's great. That's really neat. Thank you, Beth. Do we have any other comments, John, or questions?
Some more stuff in here about the home test kit to recommend people having some limited success.
Okay. The lab tests are way more sophisticated, and sometimes the home tests are not as they'll hit some of the data correctly and then some not. So I know people sometimes say, it was absolutely spot on for my pH because I had it tested by me and by a lab. And I believe that, but I don't know. They don't have the best reputation for all the elements, that a lab could do. But some people like them. So
that's about it. We're caught up.
Okay. So I just want to remind you, or tell the people who maybe showed up later, that we're on a mission to help food banks, to encourage you to help food banks. So we're going to do an amazing tour at Peaceful Morning. Disclaimer, this picture is late August, and we're going to go out there in the spring. Why are we going out there in May? Because if you want to feed people in the summer and the autumn, we got to do the work now. But we will learn about the farm, and there certainly are things planted out right now. And we will also have a work party while we're there. So you'll get more news from that. Make sure that that you're looking for my emails. And if you want more information about this subject, the book on the left is kind of, it's about at the level of the talk tonight. It has some more detail and some more like tables to guide you with sources of nitrogen and things like that. The middle book, these are all in the resource page, like most of what I've said is in the resource page, is the middle book's about restoring our soils, our degraded soils, because globally it's a big problem. And it's also about the ability of healthy soils to hold carbon dioxide. And on the right-hand side is a deeper dive and more intimate lesson about microbes in your soil. Let's see if I have any more slides because I honestly don't remember. Oh yeah. This is our Zoom. We don't always Zoom, but we do a lot of field trips this year. We're going to do a lot more field trips, but we do also have these Zooms going on. So you can, I bet most people could make their gardens much more productive, and you can do your own starts, whether you have lights or not. At certain times of year, you can do your own starts, and making your own starts allows you to overlap crops a lot, which is called tight successions. And there are ways to make very lightweight protective covers that can make your heat loving plants happier. These peppers spent part of their lives underneath there. Those are 1 foot long peppers. They're sweet peppers. And I typically get between 6 and 12 peppers per plant, even if they're not very tall plants. And that's in part because of covers that you can make that are inexpensive and simple and easy to move and easy to manage. They also allow you to continue your harvest later and fight off the critters who might want to eat your plants. But it's not just about those covers. It's about how to have successions of plantings in your garden. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about lights too, if you're interested in getting lights. I'm pretty sure this is the end. Let me see. It is. There we go. So.
Carol, quick question.
Yeah.
When is it too late to start those heat lovers? May's a long time away. Is it too late? Yeah. Should we be doing something now?
When do you start your peppers? I started my peppers recently. I only start tomatoes March 15th. So I know you started yours really early, right, Laura?
Very Shakespearean, but yes. I did start mine early, and I started some peppers like jalapenos just as a flyer. I've never done them before, but yeah. I feel like May, you're going to tell me something really interesting, and it's going to be too late for 2025. That's what I'm getting at.
That is true. You probably will have, it's true. So I sometimes time that talk much earlier in the year, like, beginning of March, but um, it's applicable to growing starts because a lot of people don't have lights. So you can grow starts even in, of cool weather crops in March, April, May, and things like that. So as far as those heat lovers go, um, if you want to do tomatoes, you're going to be too late for those guys. If you want to start squashes or cucumbers, the very beginning of May is probably not too late to do that. I really like the West Side Gardener vegetable gardening timetable. So it's true, peppers in May, it'll be too late for peppers, but if you buy peppers as transplants, then these covers will help you grow them more healthfully. Or I could change the subject of the talk if you recommend that. Um, I'm just looking at the West Side Gardener. I can put it in the chat, maybe.
West Side
There's
Gardener.
a timetable. Yeah, maybe you can put it in there. It's under quick looks once you get to West Side Gardener. Who else would like to tell us a thing? Or ask a thing? Well, I want to thank you. Oh, what's up, John?
Yeah, sorry. I'll comment on the manure since I commented. If you're going to get a manure from somebody, make sure you check out their worming process with their animals. Horses, a lot of horse owners worm their horses regularly. Same with cattle. The place that I get the alpaca manure only worms if need be. They actually do a fecal sample, believe it or not, on all their alpacas. The worming medication goes right through the animal and into your compost pile and will kill your earthworms. So very important.
Good to know. Hey, Laura, you're doing a pea assay on manure, aren't you?
I was just going to ask John, like, how does one test for that in your pile of alpaca poop, over time?
The person that I get the alpaca manure from actually sends their fecal samples out to, I think, somewhere in California. I specifically asked the question because I didn't want to kill all the earthworms in my manure pile. So they do it. I have no idea how you do a fecal sample on an alpaca, but they do it. So they don't want to run their animals through the worming cycle. But I do know that because I have property up in Squim that I lease out to cattle people, and they worm religiously. Every animal gets wormed. And I know a lot of horse people do the same thing. So that stuff does go right through the animal. And I don't know how long it lasts. I want to say I did some research on it. I want to say 3 to 6, 9 months, something like that. And then it will die off. But if you're going to put it directly on your compost pile, you're kind of jeopardizing all your little worm critters in there.
That's good information. I picked up some lovely, fresh, hot horse manure on Bainbridge like 6 months ago from a lovely person. And they weren't sure where the horse's feed came from. And I really didn't care at the moment because I didn't know any better until I think the last Veg Club. No, it was the compost field trip in Kingston. And I have got a tarp over the manure waiting for it to age, but I then got thoroughly freaked out that I was going to just destroy everything in my garden. So I've got, as Carol mentioned, I started a little, how do you say it? Is it assay?
Assay.
Right. So I've got some different groups going just with some beans to see how they're growing. And I've got 2 strong leaves going. I think I need 2 more sets to see what's shaken, to see if I can actually use that manure. But yeah, that's kind of puts the fear of God in you when you
Well, if you're tarping it and letting it age, then the worming medication will probably go away, and then you'll probably be fine there. As far as the most horse owners, probably particular, or if you're on Bainbridge, probably particular if you're on Bainbridge or the horse manure came from Bainbridge, they're very particular about the feed that they give their horses.
I'd like to think that. I'm not sure that the feed is on. I mean, I'm not quite sure of the source because the owner wasn't sure of the source either because the manure, she was a new owner of a horsey place, and she brought her horses in, and this was manure that was kind of residual from somebody else.
One of my other farming tenants up there he does the hay operation up in Squim, the biggest hay operation, and he has cow hay and he has horse hay. They're two different kinds of hay, and they're basically coming from clean fields and not so clean fields. So only his horse clients will pick the horse hay, and cattle pick the cattle hay. So they generally want cleaner horse. Clean meaning no weeds in the field.
Right. So the way they get rid of the weeds is to use clopyralids and aminopyralids. Those are weed killers. Dee, do you want to tell this?
Oh God, I'm so I'm so against horse manure. I mean, the thing is you can be a very nice person and get, food for your horse and just not realize where that, was grown. And if it has those forever chemicals in it, I would just do it in isolated beds. Go ahead and if your bean test is working and you have all the leaves come out and you don't have any curling or deformed growth on the beans, then use it for one bed. But I wouldn't spread it over my entire garden until I knew after a solid year that I was good with it. Because I've just read so many stories of people that were like, oh my God, my entire garden. And so I'm never going to put all my eggs in one basket. It's just you just don't know. And there's drift too from chemicals. So you could have an organic farm that's right up against a conventional farm, and the wind blows and all the pesticides from your neighbor's farm just blew onto yours, and it was no fault of you. There's too many variables that you can't control, which is why I struggle to find an animal source for nitrogen. And right now I'm still choosing just to do fish for my main nitrogen source.
Thanks, Steve.
I've also heard, I don't know if it's true, and Carol, I'd never heard of the chemical imidacloprid, whatever you were talking about before. But I've always been more concerned about what antibiotics they're feeding the animal. Do the antibiotics also affect the manure?
I don't think horses, I haven't owned a horse in a long time, but we never gave our horse, regular antibiotics. That usually has to do with growth of beef cattle, I think.
Okay.
I'm not as anti-manure. I'm just, I understand that position. The clopyralid and aminopyralid can break down, but they can take a super long time to do it. So that's put on hayfields sometimes. It's not legal, as I understand, in Western Washington, but it is in Eastern Washington. And people will be very confident about their hay source or their pelleted feed source. And we were learning again at the compost tour that they accept manure, but the manager knows exactly who's growing every bit of food that those horses are eating. So they contract with individual stable owners, and they have the stable owner give them all of the information about where they're getting the food, and then they trace it back basically to the field where it was grown and the farmer who grew it. So they're very careful. This is Olympic Organics who did this. But there's something called a P assay that Lara is doing. It's specifically for aminopyralid, clopyralid, which can make your garden not grow well for a long time, especially peas and things related to peas and beans and tomatoes and potatoes and stuff like that. And also, even if it if it grows, if that stuff's in there, you might want to know it. Some people don't want to eat that, right? So what you were saying, Laura, is you mixed the manure with some potting soil, right? And you grew peas in straight potting soil and then peas in manure and potting soil mix. And you grow them to 6 leaves. So they have like 3 pairs of leaves, and you compare them. And if they have no cupping or curling or contortion in any way of the leaves, then you probably don't have clopyralid and aminopyralid in there. Or you can send it to a lab that tests it and stuff like that. But that might seem like a lot of faff, but maybe you just want to grow some peas instead.
And it's isolated, and I'll just wait and see. There's no rush. So, and
One thing,
yeah, you can do Dee's program of caution, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Or being relaxed and mellow about it, not worrying about it. Yeah.
if you compost, whatever's living in your compost pile will tell you if you got good compost. If you got a lot of worms, a lot of little bugs in there, then you probably have pretty clean compost. And I sometimes if I take a scoop full out of my compost pile, I have almost more worms and little critters in there than soil.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I know that for clopyralid and aminopyralid, it will it'll contort your plants and make them not grow, those particular kinds of plants, at levels below detection. So the test can detect this much, and your plants are affected by just a tiny bit, less. So anyway, that's a cheerful note. We're going to go on a tour of a farm in May and talk about more gardening and everything. So I'm excited about that, and I'm glad that you all came. I think we're going to call it if nobody has any more things to say. Okay.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Great session.